Sleepovers are supposed to be fun. Junk food, movies, whispered secrets until dawn. But sometimes, the night holds more than laughter. Tonight, we're diving into terrifying true-style sleepover horror stories that will make you think twice about turning off the lights. This account comes from Melissa Gray, who was 16 at the time, living in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. She says that night started like any cliché teenage sleepover. Bowls of popcorn, stacks of DVDs, soda cans on every flat surface. The house belonged to her best friend Kara, who lived in a split-level ranch at the edge of a cul-de-sac. Kara's parents were both nurses pulling double shifts that weekend, which meant the girls had the place entirely to themselves. To teenagers, that felt like freedom. To Melissa, it felt like a chance to forget about the constant pressure of exams, grades, and the awkward silence at home between her divorced parents. There were 5 of them: Melissa, Kara, the twins, Mia and Zoe, and Jordan, who was new to their group but eager to fit in. They'd played Mario Kart until their thumbs ached, teased each other over inside jokes, and tried to one-up each other with scary stories. Nothing unusual. It was around midnight when Kara, restless, leaned back against the sofa and smirked. "Have you guys ever played the Whisper Man?" Melissa frowned. She hadn't. The others hadn't either. Kara explained it quickly, like she was retelling an urban legend. One person sits blindfolded in the middle of the room, while the others circle around. The blindfolded person asks, "Whisper Man, what do you want?" The rest whisper silly answers. But if the Whisper Man himself replies, you'll know. At first they laughed it off. Zoe muttered that it sounded fake. Mia curled up with a pillow, claiming she was too tired for dumb games. But Jordan's eyes lit up. He was the type who'd do anything for a dare. "Come on," he pushed. "One round. What's the worst that can happen?" Melissa remembers the weight of the silence after that. The kind of silence where no one wants to admit they're curious, but no one wants to be the coward either. So, they agreed. Melissa was chosen first. They tied a pillowcase around her eyes, spun her lightly until the room swum, then left her sitting cross-legged on the carpet. She could hear them moving, whispering, trying not to laugh. She cleared her throat and asked softly, "Whisper Man, what do you want?" The first round was easy. Someone whispered pizza, another said money, another muttered sleep. The girls laughed. Second round. "Whisper Man, what do you want?" This time, the answers came quicker, sillier. "Your soul," Jordan yelled too loudly, breaking the rules. They groaned, telling him he ruined it. Melissa almost pulled the blindfold off, but Kara insisted. "One more time. Do it right." She inhaled, nerves prickling. "Whisper Man, what do you want?" Silence. Then a voice, not high, not playful, not familiar, slid against her ear. Low, jagged, like broken glass grinding. "Let me in." Melissa tore the blindfold off so fast she nearly strangled herself on the knot. Her friends all jumped. None of them had been close enough to whisper in her ear. They swore. Kara's expression faltered. Jordan, who loved dares more than anyone, looked pale. They brushed it off quickly. Nerves, tricks of imagination, maybe someone leaning too close without realizing. But the energy in the room had shifted. They gave up on the game and tried to settle into a movie, but Melissa couldn't stop glancing at the back door, at the sliding glass doors where the curtains hung half open. The shadows outside looked too deep, too heavy. Around 2:30 a.m., Melissa woke from a light doze on the couch. Everyone else was still sprawled in sleeping bags. She was about to drift back to sleep when she heard it, a whisper. At first she thought it was one of the girls talking in their sleep, but then it slid along the walls, circling the room. "Let me in." Her chest tightened. She sat up slowly, her eyes darting toward the glass doors. Through the gap in the curtains, she saw it, a shadow standing on the patio, tall, hunched, motionless. Her breath hitched loud enough to wake Kara, who followed her gaze. Kara's face drained of color. She mouthed one word: "Run." Before Melissa could move, the whisper came again, louder this time, pressed against the glass. "Let me in." The curtains quivered as though brushed by invisible hands. Then 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Jordan stirred awake, confused. Emily blinked and sat up. By the time they all realized what was happening, every phone in the room flickered and went dead. Screens black, batteries drained. Kara grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, but when she clicked it on, the beam stuttered and died. They were left with nothing but the dim glow of the streetlight outside. Then from the far wall, another set of knocks, this time on the living room window. Knock, knock, knock. Melissa whispered, "It's moving." Nobody argued. They ran for the hallway, huddling in Kara's bedroom at the far end. The girls pushed a dresser against the door, sitting on the floor in a tight circle. They whispered plans in frantic bursts, but no one dared raise their voice. And then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the outside of the house. A dragging shuffle followed by another set of 3 knocks, this time on the upstairs window, too high for anyone to reach. Zoe whispered, trembling, "That's impossible." Silence swallowed them again. Then Melissa's phone buzzed. She hadn't even realized it had turned back on. A single text appeared on the blank screen from an unknown number. "Stop hiding." The phone went black again. Melissa's chest felt like it was caving in. She whispered to Kara, "Call the cops. Use the landline." Kara nodded, fumbling for the old cordless in her nightstand. She pressed it to her ear, but instead of a dial tone, static hissed. Then a voice. The same one. "Let me in." Kara dropped the phone like it burned her. Minutes dragged like hours. The whisper circled the house again, always followed by those 3 deliberate knocks. The girls clung to each other, tears streaming silently, afraid to breathe too loudly. At some point, exhaustion must have pulled them under, because Melissa remembers blinking awake to the sound of birds outside. Pale daylight seeped through the blinds. Relief flooded her, until she noticed the dresser. The heavy piece of furniture they had shoved against the door during the night had been moved. Not far, just enough to leave a gap. Melissa bolted upright, heart in her throat. She scanned the room. Everyone was asleep, blankets tangled, faces pale. Nobody had opened the door. Nobody should have been able to. They left as soon as Kara's parents came home that morning. They tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded hollow even to their own ears. The parents brushed it off as a game gone wrong, overactive imagination. But later that week, Melissa walked past Kara's house on her way home from school. She froze at the sight of the living room window. 3 pale handprints smeared across the glass. Too high up for any of them, too wide to belong to a child. She says even now, years later, she still hears it sometimes, always late at night, when the world is quietest. A whisper brushing across the walls, curling just beneath her window. "Let me in."
This account comes from Lily Hart, who was 15 when it happened, and she swears the memory still makes her skin crawl years later. She grew up in a quiet lakeside town in Michigan, the kind of place where parents let kids ride bikes until the streetlights buzzed on and sleepovers were as common as Friday night football games. Lily's family lived in a 2-story rental at the edge of a cul-de-sac. Nothing special, white siding, squeaky porch steps, a backyard with patchy grass, but it felt safe. That October, her parents had gone out of town for a weekend anniversary trip, leaving Lily's older cousin, Andrea, technically in charge. But Andrea was 19, more interested in her boyfriend and her phone than babysitting. So when Lily invited her 3 closest friends over for a sleepover, Andrea barely looked up from her screen. The night started like any other. pizza boxes piled high on the coffee table, nail polish fumes filling the living room, and a half-hearted attempt at a horror movie marathon. Lily, her best friend Naomi, plus twins Amber and Claire, sprawled in their sleeping bags, whispering and laughing every time a character on screen made a dumb choice. At some point, Amber suggested truth or dare. She always pushed boundaries, and Lily could see that spark in her eyes. By the third round, Amber dared Naomi to step outside onto the porch and shout something into the dark. Naomi rolled her eyes, but played along. She stood barefoot on the porch, cupped her hands, and yelled into the night, "Come find us if you're out there." The words echoed down the empty street. They all laughed when Naomi came running back in, cheeks flushed, shutting the door behind her. It felt silly, just a dare, nothing more. But Lily swears that moment shifted something. By midnight, Andrea had disappeared upstairs, music faintly thumping from her headphones, leaving the four girls on their own. The TV had died down to a screensaver glow, and the house had settled into an unnerving silence. That's when the first sound came. 3 polite taps against the front window. At first they brushed it off, a tree branch, maybe. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, intentional. Naomi pulled the curtain aside. For just a split second, a figure ducked out of view. Not a neighbor, not a prank. Someone was standing on the porch. Panic rippled through the room. They locked every door and window they could find, their laughter gone, replaced with whispers and wide eyes. Minutes stretched. The fridge hum stopped. The house went still. And then the lights flickered once, twice, before the power cut out completely. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Only the glow of their phone screens lit their faces, pale and terrified. "Breaker must have tripped," Claire muttered, but her voice cracked. That's when footsteps scraped against the porch, slow, heavy. Whoever it was wanted them to hear it. The four girls bolted upstairs, huddling in Lily's bedroom. They locked the door and pressed their backs against it, breathing in ragged unison. Then, under the door, a faint glow appeared, like a flashlight sweeping across the hallway floor. "Who's there?" Amber called out, trying to sound tough. The light clicked off instantly. Lily dialed 911 with trembling hands, whispering everything she could into the phone. The dispatcher told her to stay quiet, stay locked in, and wait. Every creak of the old house felt amplified. They heard something scraping against the siding, circling the house. At one point, Naomi swore she heard faint whistling beneath the bedroom window. They clung to each other, phone screens dimming as the minutes dragged on. Finally, the distant wail of sirens broke the silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the blinds. Relief hit like a tidal wave. Officers swept the property, radios crackling, flashlights cutting through the dark. At first, they found nothing, until one officer called out from the side yard. Fresh boot prints pressed deep into the damp grass, circling the house, stopping directly under the living room window where the girls had been earlier. The trail led towards the neighbor's shed. Inside, crouched in the shadows, was a man in a hooded jacket. Tools scattered around him. Screwdrivers, pliers, a crowbar. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stood up slowly, his face pale under the flashlight beam, and let them cuff him. As he passed the girls on the porch, his eyes locked on Lily. Calm, cold, almost amused, like the entire night had been nothing but a game. The police later told her he hadn't broken in yet, but he had the tools to do it. They believed he'd been watching the house, waiting for the right moment. Years later, Lily says she can still hear it sometimes, that faint, polite tap at the window, and she'll never forget what Naomi whispered afterwards. "We called him. We told him to come find us."
This account comes from Alex Parker, who grew up in a quiet little suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Back then, life was simple. Bike rides to the corner store for candy, hours of backyard baseball, and sleepovers that felt like the biggest adventures we could imagine. I was 13 that summer, old enough to think I was fearless, but still young enough to believe that the scariest things in life were bad grades or getting grounded. My two best friends, Jordan and Mason, were practically brothers to me. Every weekend, we found an excuse to sleep over at one house or the other. That July, it was my backyard's turn. Our house sat at the very end of a cul-de-sac, with a stretch of woods pressed up against the fence. They weren't big woods, just a tangled strip of oak and elm that separated our neighborhood from the railroad tracks. But at night, those trees felt endless. Everyone told stories about them, runaways, ghosts, even some old man who supposedly lived out there. We never knew which were true, but they gave the trees a weight that didn't lift when the sun went down. That night, we set up a green nylon tent in the far corner of the yard. My dad helped us stake it down, joking, "Just don't wake the neighbors screaming." We hauled in sleeping bags, chips, soda, and Mason's iPad loaded with YouTube videos. It felt like freedom, our own little world under the stars. The evening passed in a blur of junk food, whispered jokes, and ghost stories Mason swore he got from his older cousin. At midnight, our voices lowered, the air outside heavy with heat and mosquitoes. We were buzzing from sugar, but too stubborn to admit we were tired. It was just after 1:30 when I unzipped the tent a little, trying to get some air. That was when I noticed it. The silence. No crickets, no wind, nothing. The stillness was so complete it made my ears ring. My eyes drifted toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it. A pale face, motionless, half hidden between the branches. Its eyes were fixed directly at me. At first, I thought it was a mask someone had nailed to a trunk, but then it blinked. My breath caught so hard I couldn't even scream. "What? What is it?" Jordan whispered, sitting upright. "Someone's out there," I stammered, my voice shaking. Mason pressed his face against the thin nylon wall with flashlight in hand. The beam flickered once and died. The batteries were new, he swore under his breath. Then we heard it. Snap. A branch breaking, slow, deliberate. Then another. We froze, listening. The nylon wall shuddered like someone had brushed a hand along the outside. "That's not an animal," Jordan whispered. His face had gone pale in the glow of my watch. We tried to convince ourselves it was just nerves, but then the old gate at the back of the yard groaned. Someone was opening it. Panic surged through me. We scrambled for the zipper, fumbling with shaking hands, and bolted barefoot across the grass. My lungs burned as we threw ourselves through the back door, slamming it shut and twisting the lock. The noise woke my parents instantly. My dad came storming into the kitchen with flashlight in hand. "What the hell's going on?" "There's someone out there," I gasped. His face hardened. "Stay here." We pressed against the glass as he swept the yard with his light. At first it looked empty. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. He stared toward the trees for a long moment before coming back inside. His face was pale. "Upstairs. Now." We didn't argue. Later he told my mom in hushed tones he'd seen footprints in the mud. Big ones. Boots. Circling the tent. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They found prints leading from the gate to the tent and back into the woods, but no sign of anyone. One officer muttered it was probably a drifter. Another wasn't so sure. He kept scanning the trees like he expected something to move. The next morning, while balloons swayed on the porch for my sister's birthday, I slipped out back. The tent was still damp with dew, the flap hanging open. That's when I saw it. On the outside wall, smeared in dirt, a handprint, large, spread wide, right where my head had been
when I looked out. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. I never told my parents about the handprint, but when I showed Jordan and Mason, their faces drained. Mason muttered, "He was waiting." After that, none of us ever camped outside again. Time dulled the edges, but the memory stayed. Years later, I still see that pale face in the trees when I close my eyes. It didn't look surprised when I saw it. It didn't look angry. It looked patient, like it had been waiting all along.
I used to think the worst thing about sleepovers was running out of pizza before everyone got their share. Back then, I was 13. Old enough to want independence, but still naive enough to think the world outside our bubble was harmless. My best friend Ryan's house was the go-to spot. His parents were the type who trusted us, stocked the freezer with junk food, and turned a blind eye when the Mountain Dew cans piled too high. That Friday night, it was me, Ryan, Alex, and Chris. 4 kids sprawled out across his living room, controllers scattered on the floor, our sleeping bags rolled out like we were setting up camp. The house smelled like frozen pizza and grape soda. The TV screen glowed with a paused video game, and outside the street was quiet, safe. We laughed too loud, dared each other to drink soda faster than was reasonable, and argued about which scary movie we should stream. Then Alex, always the one itching for trouble, said, "Let's walk to the gas station. I'll buy chips." At first, Ryan shook his head. My parents said not to leave. But Alex grinned, leaning forward like a salesman. "It's 10 minutes. Come on. What's the worst that could happen?" And that's the thing about being 13. If you ask what's the worst that could happen, you're about to find out. We slipped out the sliding door, hoodies pulled up, flashlights in hand. The night air was damp, the kind that clings to your skin, and the street lights buzzed faintly overhead. We walked too loud like we were trying to prove we weren't scared, laughing at our own shadows. By the time we reached the corner store, adrenaline had dulled the edge of common sense. We loaded up with candy and chips, plastic bags rustling like trophies, and started back. That was when Alex suggested Cedar Lane. He said it's faster, pointing down the darker street. Bigger houses, fewer lights. It looked different, heavier, like the shadows pressed closer. But faster sounded good. We turned, sneakers scraping against cracked pavement. Halfway down, Ryan's flashlight beam caught something. A house that looked abandoned. Blinds shut tight, yard overgrown, porch light busted. "Bet nobody lives here," Chris muttered. Before any of us could stop him, Alex darted across the yard. "Dude, don't!" I hissed, but he was already halfway up the steps. That was when the porch light snapped on. The door creaked open. A man stood framed in yellow light, tall, broad, face hidden in shadow. He didn't shout, didn't ask what we were doing. He just stood there, watching. My stomach turned to ice. "Run!" We bolted, sneakers pounding the pavement, candy bags bouncing against our sides. I didn't dare look back until we collapsed under a street lamp a block away. My chest burned, but Ryan pointed with trembling hands. "He's still there." And sure enough, the man was still in the doorway, perfectly still, watching us. We forced ourselves to keep walking faster this time. Every shadow felt alive. Every tree seemed to shift in the corner of my eye. Then Chris whispered, "Guys." Half a block behind us, under another porch light, stood the same silhouette. "He can't be that fast," Alex stammered. "He doesn't have to be," I muttered. "He's just there." We ran. Sour Patch scattered across the sidewalk, chips spilling from ripped bags. Our lungs burned, but fear pushed us faster. Ryan's house finally came into view, the sliding door glowing faintly like salvation. We tumbled inside, slammed it shut, and yanked the curtain across. For a while, we convinced ourselves it was just a neighbor angry about kids in his yard. We even laughed shakily, until the sound came. Tap, 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 against the glass. We froze. The beam of Alex's flashlight caught it, a handprint smeared fresh across the sliding door. We screamed. We barreled upstairs, shouting for Ryan's parents. His dad stormed down, baseball bat in hand, but when he flung the door open, the yard was empty. Silent. He muttered about soda, scary movies, and kids with overactive imaginations. But none of us slept. Every creak of the house made us flinch. Every shadow felt like it was waiting. Weeks later, the news broke. A man had been arrested for prowling neighborhoods at night. On his phone, police found blurry photos of kids taken through windows. And one photo stopped me cold. 4 boys, under a street lamp, candy bags in hand. Us. In the background, faint but clear, was that same silhouette. After that, sleepovers weren't the same. Ryan's parents banned late-night walks. Cedar Lane became the street we never touched. And I learned something that night. Danger doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a porch light snapping on, or a man who never hurries because he knows exactly where you'll be. We thought sneaking out was harmless, just a game. But sometimes, one choice changes everything.
I grew up in the kind of town people described as safe. The kind of place where porch lights were left on more for decoration than security, where kids played tag until the street lights flickered on, and where nobody worried about locking a screen door. Summers felt endless. Bikes, backyard games, sleepovers that blurred together. Jake's birthday was always the highlight. His parents didn't have a lot, but they had heart. Every year they rented stacks of movies, bought pizzas that barely fit on the counter, and let us treat their backyard like it was our own. That year, when we begged to camp outside in a tent, they surprised us by saying yes. It was me, Jake, Tyler, Chris, and Mason, 4 boys who thought we were tougher than we were. The tent was massive, borrowed from a family friend, with room for sleeping bags, snacks, flashlights, and the kind of restless energy only 12-year-olds have. The night started like any other. Marshmallows at the fire pit, way too many hot Cheetos, and jokes that weren't nearly as funny as we thought. Jake's dad stayed until the flames burned down low, then told us not to get too loud before heading inside. That's when Chris grinned and said, "Let's play hide and seek in the dark." We all laughed, but then shrugged. Why not? The yard had shadows, tall grass, a shed, and a tree line against the fence. It felt like the perfect mix of scary and fun. Jake counted first, pressing his face into his hands. The rest of us scattered. My heart pounded, even though it was just a game. I ducked near the tree line, Tyler hid behind the grill, Chris dropped into the grass, and Mason slipped behind the shed. 17, 18, 19, 20. Ready or not? Jake's flashlight beam sliced the dark like a lighthouse. He found Tyler first. Then Mason sneezed, ruining his spot. The beam swung toward the grass, catching a crouched figure. "Found you, Chris," Jake said. But Chris didn't move, didn't laugh, didn't complain. The figure stood, too tall, too broad. It wasn't Chris. The man bolted, vaulting the fence with a speed that sucked the air out of the night. Jake's scream cracked through the yard, high and raw. Chris popped up from the opposite side, pale, wide-eyed. "What happened?" he whispered, until he saw Jake's face. "There was someone else," Jake muttered. We didn't wait to argue. We tore for the sliding door, dragging sleeping bags across the grass, slamming it shut behind us. Our lungs burned, our hands shook, and Jake's dad came downstairs rubbing his eyes. "There was someone in the yard!" Jake gasped. His dad frowned, sighed like we'd worked ourselves up, and stepped outside with a flashlight. We pressed against the glass, desperate. But the beam swept the grass, the shed, the fence. Empty. "Probably just a teenager messing around," he muttered. "Go back to bed." We tried. We really did. But the laughter was gone. Every sound outside the tent made us jump. By 2 a.m., exhaustion weighed us down, and one by one the others drifted off,
I stayed awake, listening to the silence. Then Mason sat up. His face looked gray in the dim glow of a flashlight. He pressed his ear to the mesh wall of the tent. "What is it?" I whispered. His eyes widened. He mouthed one word. "Footsteps." The crunch of leaves came from the far end of the yard. Slow. Steady. Mason peeked through the mesh. His breath hitched. "He's the same guy. He's just standing there watching." I didn't look. I couldn't. None of us moved until dawn. When Jake's dad walked the yard the next morning, his face tightened. Fresh, muddy boot prints led from the far corner of the fence straight up to the tent. We never used that tent again. Years passed. We grew older. Jake moved, Tyler joined the military, Chris got busy with sports. But Mason never really shook it. And sophomore year, he showed me a folded note he found in his locker. No envelope, just one line written in shaky scrawl. "I still watch." He looked at me. Eyes hollow. Who would believe me? I couldn't answer. Even now, years later, I still hear it sometimes. The crunch of leaves. The silence pressing against the dark. Monsters don't always hide in nightmares. Sometimes they stand in the yard. Broad-shouldered. Patient. Waiting.
If you enjoyed these stories and want more, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a night of chilling new horror stories.